Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Wiegers, Editor-in-Chief of Copper Canyon Press, and I'm coming to you live from my home office in beautiful Port Townsend, Washington, which is a small city on the Salish Sea on Sklallam land. And I want to thank everyone there out there for joining us. Just a couple of logistics to help everyone access tonight's poetry. If it would help you to follow along with closed captioning, please take a moment to activate the closed caption option on your screen. Tonight we'll have a wonderful combination of live caption. I'm sorry, tonight we'll have a combination of live captions thanks to our wonderful interns, Zura and Ruben, who are working hard behind the scenes. And alongside those captions, we'll also have a few embedded, which you'll automatically see appear on your screen. Additionally, please feel free to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen to let us know that you're out there, and also where you're watching from. And also feel free to ask any questions you may have for tonight's presenters. I can't promise we'll be able to answer all of them, but our panelists will be able to see your comments and questions, and we'll try to get them if the time allows. So we appreciate your being with us, and so again, welcome. We're all here for a celebration of two extraordinary poets who have been important to the evolution of Copper Canyon Press, Ruth Stone and June Jordan. Personally, editing their books over the past 2 decades has been foundational to me as a publisher and editor. And it's thrilling for me tonight to be able to collaborate with some other terrific poets, writers, and editors who are joining us to help honor these our poetic elders while also raising some funds for Copper Canyon Press. As you probably know, Copper Canyon is a nonprofit independent book publisher. I just gave a hint into what I used to do years ago. We're an independent book publisher, and we've been entirely dedicated to poetry for almost 50 years. A few years back, we started a new series of anthologies called our Essential Poetry Series. The idea of the Essential Series was to create affordable, accessible editions that distill the lifelong works of a major poet down to some of their most essential and important poems. And also importantly, we were hoping to make them readily available to a new generation of readers and poets through more portable and affordable editions. Copper Canyon is, of course, dedicated to bringing you exciting, emerging, and younger poets at the same time that we love to celebrate those who laid the groundwork for their arrival. The first poet we honored in our series was William Merwin, the Essential W.S. Merwin. And then we followed that with the Essential Jim Harrison. And now we're thrilled that we've just hot off the presses are publishing the Essential Ruth Stone. And we're also gathering tonight to celebrate the Essential June Jordan, which we'll be publishing in the spring of 2021 with the help of all of you. So your financial support is absolutely essential to us in order to edit, produce, and print the books, and also to bring them to a new generation of poetry readers. So tonight, our Kickstarter campaign goes live to support these 2 books and poets specifically. And you're the first people in the world we are turning to and inviting to proudly join us in our larger efforts to support and sustain important legacies in poetry. We're going to share a link in the chat now so you have it handy in order to make a donation. But I hope you'll hang in until the end of the program because there's some rich poetry to hear and see all along the way. So before we get to that, let's get to know Ruth Stone and June Jordan a bit. So again, if you've just joined us, I'd like to welcome you. You've tuned in to our virtual benefit celebrating Ruth Stone and June Jordan. And I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first honoree. Ruth Stone is the author of 13 books of poetry, including What Love Comes To, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and In the Next Galaxy, which won the National Book Award. These recognitions finally came to her late in her life, and it was so affirming to be a part of those celebrations. And despite the late arrival of her award recognition, she had a vivid career as one of last century's most influential poets, with her wild formalism and her cosmic intellect. Ruth wrote dazzling, humorous, grief-stricken poems, and was clear-eyed and bold about issues of power, patriarchy, and poverty. Yet, as she wrote in her poem, Being Human, survive, I do not doubt we will. I do not doubt that all things are possible. She shared this passionate belief in poetry with generations of younger writers. Ruth passed away in Vermont in 2011, and she's dearly missed, even while, for me personally, her laughter rings clearly in my ears. To celebrate Ruth tonight, you're about to watch a video message, video messages from Alison C. Rollins, author of Library of Small Catastrophes, which we published at Copper Canyon Press, and Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love, and City of Girls. And then you're going to be treated to a poem read by Ruth herself, from in her home in Vermont. I absolutely adore this video, which was filmed around the same time that I first met Ruth in person. As you'll probably notice, her eyesight was failing badly at that time. And just a little insight to her personality. When we first met, it was at the National Book Awards the night before the award ceremony, and she was seated, and as I walked up to her to introduce myself and knelt next to her to introduce myself, she said, "Dear Heart," which is how she would always address me. "Dear Heart, let me get a closer look at you." And she grabbed my face and pulled with both hands and pulled it right into hers, and studied my face to inspect this young kid who was making her books. I, of course, was disarmed immediately, and whatever intimidation I may have felt just immediately vanished. You'll get a sense of that spirit in this video. So after Ruth's reading, we'll be joined live by Bianca Stone, who's the editor of the Essential Ruth Stone and the director of the Ruth Stone Foundation. Bianca is herself a celebrated, fantastic poet and artist, and is also Ruth's granddaughter. So Bianca, please.
Hello to everyone at home, and thank you so much for choosing to celebrate poetry this evening. My name is Alison C. Rollins, and I'm so humbled to have the honor to join in the celebration of this new Ruth Stone anthology, The Essential Ruth Stone. I wanted to share a little bit about how I first encountered Ruth Stone's work, and it's through this collection called In the Next Galaxy. Many moons ago, when I was a freshman undergraduate studying at Howard University, I was given this collection of poems as a gift by one of my English professors. And it was a gift given to me from the bookstore Borders, which I still kept the sticker on here, is now no longer open as a bookstore. But I remember as a young person at this pivotal point in my educational journey being so excited, feeling like I was unstoppable, feeling like everything was at my disposal as a young, kind of vigorous college student, and being presented with this collection that had a pear and a coconut on the front, this still life portrait and painting, and being so moved also by the particular photograph of Ruth on the back. And I've had this for now many, 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 many years, many, many moves, many apartments, living many places throughout the country. And it still continues to be a book that I draw from. and that I'm inspired by. And I think it speaks to Ruth's ability to write towards the past, present, and the future. To think that there's an element of futurity that was possible or that was planted as a seed when I was first an undergrad that would be fed and flourished and grow to me now having my own debut first collection of poetry be published on the same press as Ruth Stone, to be sharing a press family of Copper Canyon with Ruth is absolutely phenomenal. This book is something that I genuinely, truly, truly treasure. And to think that I've carried it with me all of these years and a past version of myself kind of extended it or passed it as a baton from Ruth to me in the past to me now in the present is absolutely remarkable. I've chosen two poems from this particular collection that have now made their way into this new Stone anthology, and I'm so delighted to be able to share them with you. The two poems are called Poems and Train Ride. So I'll start with poems. Poems. When you come back to me, it will be crow time and flycatcher time, with rising spirals of gnats between the apple trees. Every weed will be quadrupled, coarse, welcoming and spine-tipped. The crows, their black flapping bodies, their long calling toward the mountain, relatives like mine, ambivalent, eye-hooded, hooting and tearing, and you will take me in to your fractal, meaningless babble, the quick of my mouth, the madness of my tongue. Train ride. All things come to an end. Small calves in Arkansas, the bend of the muddy river. Do all things come to an end? No. They go on forever. They go on forever. The swamp, the vine-choked cypress, the oaks rattling last year's leaves, the thump of the rails, the kite, the still white stilted heron, all things come to an end. The red clay bank, the spread hawk, the bodies riding this train, the stalled truck, pale sunlight, the talk goes on forever. The wide, dry field of geese, a man stopped near his porch to watch. Release, release. Between cold death and a fever, send what you will, I will listen. All things come to an end. No, they go on forever. I'm so grateful for Stone's words. I'm so grateful that her poetry will continue to go on forever. I can't wait to pass this new anthology into the hands of one of my students and to think what beautiful, incredible things they will create as a result. Thank you again for choosing to celebrate Copper Canyon. Thank you again for choosing to celebrate this new anthology, The Essential Ruth Stone.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Gilbert. I'm the author of Eat, Pray, Love and Big Magic and City of Girls and some other books. And I'm here with you tonight to be part of this celebration of poetry and, most importantly, to be part of this celebration of the great Ruth Stone. I was fortunate enough to have met Ruth in 2002 when I was a young writer, and I met her at a ceremony for the National Book Awards. I had never heard of her work at that point, but somebody very wise and gracious in the room pointed her out to me and said, "It's a very interesting woman, you should go talk to her." I was with a friend, a young friend, and we ended up quite literally sitting at Ruth's feet for the entirety of the evening, listening to her tell stories about her work and about her childhood. And I will never forget, and I've spoken about this before, I spoke about this in my TED Talk that I gave years later because it was one of the most enchanting descriptions of creative genius I've ever heard. I will never forget the experience of listening to Ruth Stone describe to me what it felt like for her as a young girl to be outside in the fields, in nature, and to quite suddenly feel a poem coming upon her. She said it sounded like horses galloping across the hills, coming at her physically, and that it would move through her body. And at that point, she would run as fast as she could to the house to try to grab a piece of paper and a pencil and try to catch the poem as it was passing through her body. And that sometimes she'd be able to, and sometimes she wouldn't. She wouldn't get to the paper in time, and the poem would have run its course through her and gallop across the landscape, as she said, looking for another poet. And sometimes, and this is the part that was so magical, she said she would almost grasp the poem, and then it would move through her, and she would grab it, she said, by the tail, and she would pull it backwards into her body as she was writing it down from the last word backwards to the first. She was a mystic. She was a mystic, and I don't mind using that word because I don't think she would have minded it. I only had that short encounter with her, but it was life-changing, as it would be if you were a young, creative person and you met a genuine mystic. So I have a great debt of gratitude to Ruth Stone, and it is greatly to my pleasure right now to be able to read a poem of hers, which is called Fragrance, and is very similarly about what she told me on that day when I met her in 2002. So here it is, Fragrance by Ruth Stone. Edna St. Vincent Millay, her friends called her Vincent, lived for a time in New York in the Village. E. E. Cummings lived there too, and even I was living then, but in the Midwest, in Indianapolis. Then my father, sitting at his linotype machine, the hot lead slugs clicking and falling, would sometimes print a poem of mine, something he found around the house. Poems came to me as if from far away. I would feel them coming. I would rush into the house looking for a paper and pencil. It had to be quick, for they passed through me and were gone forever. What are children's poems? Like the sudden breeze that pulls the petals from the honeysuckle. Much later, when I lived in the Village, E. E. Cummings was a faint legend. Poets come and go, like squills that bloom in the melting snow. Thank you so much.
Bargain. I was not ready for this world, nor will I ever be, but came an infant, periled by my mother's sea, and crying piteously. Before my father's sword, his heavy voice of thunder, his cloud-hung fiery eyes, I ran a living blunder. After the hawker's cries, desiring to be shared, I hid among the flies. Myself became the fruit and vendor. I began to sing, mocking the caged birds. I made my offering. Sweet cream and curds, oh, who will have me? Who will have me? And close upon my words, I will, said poverty.
I just wanted to say quickly that I really love that poem. And a couple of summers ago, I had the great privilege of visiting Bianca Stone at the Ruth Stone house. And with Bianca's guidance, she led me through the rooms, and I was able to imagine all the students Ruth mentored there and what her poetry-filled days must have been like. And we get a sense of the place there in that video. And so, Bianca, we're absolutely thrilled that you're here as the editor of The Essential Ruth Stone. And I'm hoping maybe you'll sometime tonight regale us with some personal tales of sharing that space with your grandmother and the work you've been doing to preserve Ruth's legacy. So please.
Thank you so much, Michael, and everyone for being here. I'm very excited. And I know my grandma would be really excited to be here. She'd be like, way up here. She loved the computer, actually. She got a computer really early on in the computer days, and she had so much fun typing on it. So I think she'd be excited. I'm going to read 2 poems from her early books. This first poem is called Tenacity, and it touches upon one of her major subjects that she wrote about, which was her the loss of her husband, great love of her life, to suicide. Tenacity. Can it be over so soon? Why, only a day or so ago, you let me win at chess while you felt my dress around the knees. That room we went to 60 miles away. Have those bus trips ended? The willows turning by, drooping like patient beasts under their yellow hair on the winter fields, crossing the snow streams. Was it for the last time? Going to meet you, I thought I saw the embalmer standing there on the ordinary dirty street of that gross and ordinary city, which opened like a paper flower at the ballet, at the art gallery, in those dark booths drinking beer. One night, leaning in a stone doorway, I waited for the wrong person. And when he came, I noticed the dead blue color of his skin under the neon light and the odor of rubbish behind a subway shed. I sit for hours at the window preparing a letter. You are coming toward me. We are balanced like dancers in memory. I feel your coat. I smell your clothes, your tobacco. You almost touch me. The excuse. Do they write poems when they have something to say, something to think about, rubbed from the world's hard rubbing in the excess of every day? The summer I was 24 in San Francisco, you and I, the whole summer seemed like a cable car ride over the Gold Bay. But once in a bistro, angry at one another, we quarreled about a taxi fare. I doubt it was the fare we quarreled about, but one excuse is as good as another, in the excess of passion, in the need to be worn away. Do they know it is the cleanness of skin, firmness of flesh that matters? It is so difficult to look at the deprived or smell their decay. But now I am among them. I too am a leper, a warning. I hold out my crippled fingers. My voice flatters everyone who comes this way in the weeds of mourning, groaning and gnashing. I display myself in malodorous comic wrappings and tatters, in the excess of passion, in the need to be worn away. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. I remember when we first started, you and I first started talking about this book, and again, I think it was when we were walking around the house, and I'm going to quote you here, but you said you wanted to show younger readers what a badass your grandmother was. And you've just done a remarkable job in gathering her work into this collection. So thank you. And speaking of badasses, June Jordan. June is the author of 10 books of poetry, 7 collections of essays, 2 plays, a libretto, a novel, a memoir, and 5 children's books. And that list is only a fraction of what she accomplished during her lifetime. June was a poet who was fiercely dedicated to building a better world and a more inclusive community. Her poetry to the people program, it's a mouthful, I'm sorry, started 30 years ago and continues to this day. And the San Francisco High School, the June Jordan School for Social Equity, also continues her legacy of teaching nonviolent activism. To quote what may be June's most famous line, which has since been used powerfully by our last president, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." And as Obama demonstrated, Jordan's poems are at once of their era and they're timeless, and resonate today, I think, with subject matter that confronts racist police brutality, violence against women, and the urgent need for global solidarity between movements and people. She wrote poems of great immediacy and radical kindness. And as you'll hear shortly, she has inspired many to live and write bravely and with love. To celebrate June, you'll first hear a message from Jericho Brown, whose book, The Tradition, won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry this year, and was published by Copper Canyon. Jericho has written an essay that will accompany the Essential June Jordan as well. He pre-recorded his message for you because he's currently recovering from some health issues, so we're sending him all our love and gratitude. Here's Jericho Brown.
Hi, my name is Jericho Brown, and I'm happy to welcome you to a night of celebration, and I'm happy to share in this celebration with you. I'm excited about poetry. Every time you see me, I'm excited about poetry, and I'm particularly excited about the work of Ruth Stone and June Jordan. As a matter of fact, I'm writing the introduction to June Jordan's Essential Poems. And I'm so happy you're gonna get to see this book. It's a beautiful book, and it has some of her best work in prose and poetry, and I'm really amazed at the opportunity. I wanted to share, this is sort of an opportunity for show and tell. And so I'm gonna show you something. I guess you can't really see it on your screen. I would give it out to pass around if we were together. But what I'm holding in my hand is a poem by June Jordan. And it's a poem that I've kept with me for, I would say, the last 21, maybe 23 years. And it went from a bunch of wallets. I was that person who always had a wallet that was this thick. And it would go back and forth between wallets to cork boards on the wall, or to just that part in the dresser where you stick a piece of paper in the mirror, between the mirror and its border. And it's a poem that I've loved a long time. And what I really love about this poem is that it shows us a lot about who June Jordan is as a person, and as an activist, and as a poet. We have to remember that she was all of these things at once. We know her to be a poet of resistance. But I think that June Jordan's sense of resistance was particular. And I think it was particular because she was resisting any force that would keep us away from one another. And she really believed in writing as the opportunity to make connection with those that you otherwise would not be able to make connection. And so we understand that for June Jordan, writing was about community. It was about a community of ancestors who had written before and who gave us access to them through their writing. And it was about a present day community, the people that she taught and the people that she worked with, and making use of writing to actually enact change in the world. And it's about the future. It's about those who have your poems after you're gone. And there's a way now that when we think about resistance, somehow or another, we're also thinking about violence. And June Jordan, what she was really interested in was connection, was touch. So I'm going to read you this poem, and I'm going to read it from this slip of paper that I just pulled out of a mirror in the bedroom. These poems, they are things that I do in the dark, reaching for you, whoever you are. And are you ready? These words, they are stones in the water running away. These skeletal lines, they are desperate arms for my longing and love. I am a stranger, learning to worship the strangers around me. Whoever you are, whoever I may become. Thank y'all so much again for joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you always for giving and for giving to poetry. And right now we know that June Jordan and Ruth Stone are looking at us and smiling. Thank y'all so much for having me.
Oh, well, can never get too much of Jericho Brown. And like Jericho, I often think of June as a love poet. My own first encounter with her work was when I read her Haruko love poems. And after reading that book, I was hooked and went on to learn about her other work, including most of her poetry, which Copper Canyon would eventually publish in this big old fat Directed by Desire. So next we're going to hear, and we're going to see June and hear her powerful poem About My Rights, which has been artfully animated by Kali Films and read by June herself. And I'd like to preface this video by offering a brief content warning here. Poem About My Rights is one of June's most renowned poems, and as you'll see, it includes explicit references to rape and other forms of violence. It's ultimately a poem of great power and empowerment, but of course I want to encourage everyone listening to take care of yourselves and however you might need to, as difficult topics are brought to the surface. And when we were constructing this program tonight, there was a serious and wonderful staff engagement around this poem, whether it was going to be too difficult for people to hear, whether we should share it with you. And we ultimately decided that this voice, particularly during these times, is one we need to hear and read. I've been moved by this poem for many years, and it still moves me profoundly. It's not only, as Jericho said, hers is not only a voice of resistance that we need, but it's a voice of resilience. And so after watching that video, we'll be joined live by two guests, poet Monica Suck, author of A Nail the Evening Hangs On, and Rio Cortez, who serves brilliantly as Copper Canyon's editor-at-large and works at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and like June, is a Harlem poet and children's book author herself.
Even tonight. And I need to take a walk and clear my head about this poem about why I can't go out without changing my clothes, my shoes, my body posture, my gender identity, my age, my status as a woman alone in the evening, alone on the streets, alone not being the point being that I can't do what I want to do with my own body because I am the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin. And suppose it was not here in the city, but down on the beach or far into the woods, and I wanted to go there by myself, thinking about God, thinking about children, or thinking about the world, all of it disclosed by the stars and the silence. I could not go, and I could not think, and I could not stay there alone as I need to be alone because I can't do what I want to do with my own body. And who in the hell set things up like this? And in France, they say, if the guy penetrates but does not ejaculate, then he did not rape me. And if after stabbing him, if after screams, if after begging the bastard, and if even after smashing a hammer to his head, if even after that, if he and his buddies fucked me after that, then I consented and there was no rape because finally, you understand, finally they fucked me over because I was wrong. I was wrong again to be me being me where I was wrong to be who I am, which is exactly like South Africa, penetrating into Namibia, penetrating into Angola. And does that mean, how do you know if Pretoria ejaculates? What will the evidence look like? The proof of the monster jackboot ejaculation on black land. And if after Namibia, and if after Angola, and if after Zimbabwe, and if after all of my kinsmen and women resist, even to self-immolation of the villages, and if after that we lose nevertheless, what will the big boys say? Will they claim my consent? Do you follow me? We are the wrong people of the wrong skin on the wrong continent, and what in the hell is everybody being reasonable about? And according to the Times this week, back in 1966, the CIA decided that they had this problem, and the problem was a man named Nkrumah, so they killed him. And before that, it was Patrice Lumumba, and before that, it was my father on the campus of my Ivy League school, and my father afraid to walk into the cafeteria because he said he was wrong. The wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong gender identity, and he was paying my tuition. And before that, it was my father saying I was wrong, saying that I should have been a boy because he wanted one, a boy, and that I should have been lighter skinned, and that I should have had straighter hair, and that I should not be so boy crazy, but instead I should just be one, a boy. I am the history of rape. I am the history of the rejection of who I am. I am the history of the terrorized incarceration of myself. I am the history of battery, assault, and limitless armies against whatever I want to do with my mind and my body and my soul. And whether it's about walking out at night, or whether it's about the love that I feel, or whether it's about the sanctity of my vagina, or the sanctity of my national boundaries, or the sanctity of my leaders, or the sanctity of each and every desire that I know from my personal and idiosyncratic and indisputably single and singular heart, I have been raped because I have been wrong. The wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong nose, the wrong hair, the wrong need, the wrong dream, the wrong geographic, the wrong sartorial. I have been the meaning of rape. I have been the problem everyone seeks to eliminate by forced penetration, with or without the evidence of slime. And but let this be unmistakable. This poem is not consent. I do not consent to my mother, to my father, to the teachers, to the FBI, to South Africa, to Bedford-Stuy, to Park Avenue, to American Airlines, to the hard-on idlers on the corners, to the sneaky creeps in cars. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own. And I can't tell you who the hell set things up like this, but I can tell you that from now on, my resistance, my simple and daily and nightly self-determination may very well cost you your life.
I'd like to take a moment to breathe after that. Still taking it in. Monica, I know that poem about my rights is an important one for you. I'd love to hear how it was for you to watch June's performance and hear that.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be sharing space with all of you out there to celebrate both Ruth Stone and June Jordan. Hearing that poem about my rights, well, I listened to that a few times in the last week because I was teaching this poem. But also, I listened to this poem to remind me what poetry is. So hearing that again and seeing the words spelled out and seeing June's, the video of June also in that artistic film is really meaningful and very evocative for me. When I think about that poem, I think about how poetry is about truth telling. And June Jordan, to me, is a truth teller. And her narrative and her poems and her activism and her community building and her love and her people centering has certainly shaped me as a poet. And I first encountered her poetry when I went to the second annual Split This Rock Poetry Festival when I was starting to become interested in poetry. And that was in Washington, D.C. And I heard a group of poets, friends and loved ones who just celebrated her work. They were reading her work out loud. And I was so intrigued by the end. And by the end of that reading, I felt that I knew her. And somehow I felt included in this community, in this poetry, in this wondrous thing called poetry. And I went to the library on the day of my college graduation. And I actually checked out Directed by Desire. So I have a really meaningful relationship with June Jordan, the poet, because I don't think I would be here writing poems. I don't know if I would have seen myself in poetry if it wasn't for her poems. So I'm going to read I Must Become a Menace to My Enemies. And this is dedicated to the poet Agostinho Neto, President of the People's Republic of Angola, 1976. 1. I will no longer lightly walk behind a one of you who fear me. Be afraid. I plan to give you reasons for your jumpy fits and facial tics. I will not walk politely on the pavements anymore. And this is dedicated in particular to those who hear my footsteps or the insubstantial rattling of my grocery cart, then turn around, see me, and hurry on. Away from this impressive terror I must be. I plan to blossom bloody on an afternoon, surrounded by my comrades singing terrible revenge in merciless, accelerating rhythms. But I have watched a blind man studying his face. I have set the table in the evening and sat down to eat the news. Regularly, I have gone to sleep. There is no one to forgive me. The dead do not give a damn. I live like a lover who drops her dime into the phone just as the subway shakes into the station, wasting her message, canceling the question of her call. Fulminating or forgetful, but late, and always after the fact that could save or condemn me. I must become the action of my fate. 2. How many of my brothers and sisters will they kill before I teach myself retaliation? Shall we pick a number? South Africa, for instance. Do we agree that more than 10,000 in less than a year, but that less than 5,000 slaughtered in more than 6 months will? What is the matter with me? I must become a menace to my enemies. 3. And if I ever let you slide, who should be extirpated from my universe, who should be cauterized from Earth completely, law and order jerk-offs of the first and terrorist degree, then let my body fail my soul and as bedeviled lecheries. And if I ever let love go, because the hatred and the whisperings become a phantom dictate, I obey in lieu of impulse and realities, the blossoming flamingos of my wild mimosa trees, then let love freeze me out. I must become a menace to my enemies. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And now we're going to welcome Copper Canyon's editor-at-large, Rio Cortez. Rio.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Monica and Bianca, for those readings. I hadn't seen the video, so that was really meaningful to me also. I think now is a wonderful time to read Jude Jordan if you've never encountered her work before. Always is good, but especially now. So if there are people watching this who are hearing her words for the first time, I think it's a really exciting time. So I'm reading a poem called Letter to the Local Police. Dear Sirs, I've been enjoying the law and order of our community throughout the past 3 months since my wife and I, our 2 cats, and miscellaneous photographs of the 6 children belonging to our previous neighbors with whom we were very close, arrived in Saratoga Springs, which is clearly prospering under your custody. Indeed, until yesterday afternoon, and despite my vigilant casting about, I have been unable to discover a single instance of reasons for public-spirited concern, much less complaint. You may easily appreciate then how it was that I write to your office at this date with utmost regret for the lamentable circumstances that forced my hand. Speaking directly to the issue of the moment, I have encountered a regular profusion of certain unidentified roses growing to no discernible purpose and according to no perceptible control approximately 1/4 mile west of the Northway on the southern side. To be specific, there are practically thousands of aforementioned abiding in perpetual near riot of wild behavior, indiscriminate coloring, and only the good Lord himself can say what diverse soliciting of promiscuous cross-fertilization. As I say, these roses, no matter what the apparent background, training, tropistic tendencies, age, or color, do not demonstrate the least inclination toward categorization, specified allegiance, resolute preference, consideration of the needs of others, or any other minimal traits of decency. May I point out that I did not assiduously seek out this colony, as it were, and that these certain unidentified roses remain open to viewing, even by children, with or without suitable supervision. My wife asks me to append a note as regards the seasonal, but nevertheless seriously licentious phenomenon of honeysuckle under the moon that one may apprehend at the corner of Nelson and Main. However, I have recommended that she undertake direct correspondence with you as regards this, yet another civic disturbance in our midst. I am confident that you will devise and pursue appropriate legal response to the roses in question. If I may aid your efforts in this respect, please do not hesitate to call me into consultation. Respectfully yours.
Thank you, Rio. So while we have, these brilliant minds and hearts gathered here, I want to invite the three of you, Rio, Monica, and Bianca, maybe to talk with each other a little bit about Ruth Stone and about June Jordan, and maybe the importance of their influence on you as writers and literary citizens, and the importance of your influences. And I'm going to, ask that people forgive me if I look down to my phone, because I'm a bit awkward with navigating all the things. But we currently have people tuning in from New Zealand, from Maui, from Tucson, from Amherst, from Philly, from Oakland, from North Carolina, from Virginia, from Atlanta, and a few hundred other people, I guess, have stopped in on Facebook, and we don't know exactly where all of you are, but you're scattered all over the world, which is fantastic. And some of you have questions for us, and so maybe I thought I'd kick off with a couple questions that have come in. One which just came in is, I'd love for folks to talk about the power of the plain spoken poem. Both Stone and Jordan said what they meant and meant exactly that. Are we in a time where too much metaphor is truly a luxury we can't afford? Do we need to speak directly into this current fire? I'm hoping that the three of you might answer that. That's a question from Ashley. I'm afraid I don't know Ashley's last name, but thank you for such a great question. So,
yeah, I think I think plain spoken is, on one hand, I've sort of resisted that term in the way that it's been applied to Ruth so long, because I felt like for some reason it sounded kind of dismissive of the complexity maybe of her poetry, that this term accessible, at the same time, like I think it is, like I think that poets who are just naturally good at letting the reader into their poems, they have this certain gift of being able to say things plainly and bluntly. And I think Monica was talking about the poetry as dealing with truth telling, at the same time, you know, that poetry has a tradition of being much like you'd see sort of in the Gnostic Gospels or something like that, like these sort of like coded mysteries behind the words that are also really important to the poem as well. So like in a way, like, yes, it's important to be direct about certain issues, especially right now. At the same time, there's always going to be this element of like negative capability, or what's not said, or what's a little more complex and not directly said, which is, you know, that's what makes a poem. So it's important not to dismiss the complexity of metaphor and even absurdity in poetry, because that's what makes it poetry and not prose. So I think having like a sort of, for me, what's important as a poet, just as in my own writing, is like, it's really important to find a balance between those things. And I think it changes from poem to poem, from line to line. And, you know, some lines are going to speak to people really directly, and other lines, the same people are going to be confused about. So I think people have anxiety about accessibility in poetry. And especially people who love poetry, worrying about more complex poems, like locking the readers out and having people be less attracted to poetry because of that. And I think that's valid, but yeah, I mean, I love directness in poetry. So that's enough. You guys talk now.
I wonder, another way of you know, asking the question might be, you know, what do each of you see as the difference between poetic speech as opposed to, say, political speech? Because political speech can also be very direct, but there's, with somebody like Ruth and June both, they kind of thread the needle between the poetic and the political. So, but Monica or Rio, would you care to chime in?
Sure. I think maybe the difference between political speech and poetic speech is exactly what Bianca and Monica have talked about. It's truth. That could be a big part of it. Poetics, I think that you can engage politically with lyricism. I think you can engage politically with directness, as long as you're speaking truthfully. And I think readers detect that intuitively. And that's true of not just poetry, but many things. It's true of a joke. I think as you detect the truth of it, its success gets revealed. And so for me, that's really essential.
Thank you both for talking about, well, you know, what it means to be direct in poetry and what it means to be political as well. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I probably would not have continued writing poetry, and you know, if it was not for June Jordan, if I had not encountered her poetry, but not only her poems on the page, but her voice, the sound of her voice, her actual body, you know, on footage that I could access and connect with, and the actual people who love her and edited her actual friends in a space. And aside from like the directness of language and poetry, like there's this kind of directness of my lived experience, like my bodily experience with her work as well. And yes, I used to think that poetry needed to be very formal. I thought I had to know all of the literary devices. I had to know all of these poetic terms that lived inside of, like, you know, yes, poetry, but also a kind of in an academic sense. And I tried to look for poetry everywhere. And I found a class, you know, which was wonderful. And at the same time, when I was in that space, I was trying to write sonnets. I was trying to write, you know, all kinds of things that I didn't really understand. And were not necessarily part of my tradition or where I'm coming from, you know, as a person in this world. as a woman of color, as a Khmer woman. So when I think about my connection with June Jordan's work, I think about how she empowered me, to write poems. This incredible queer Black woman, feminist, was able to empower me, a Khmer woman, a daughter of refugees, to go towards my own narrative. And so there's this directness in her poetry. And I won't call it like plain spoken or necessarily accessible either to reduce anything, but I just mean that she said it like it was, she just, let me say it like it is. Who in the hell set things up like this, right? Like that question in Poem About My Rights. I really connected with her experience and the way that she did not hide anything and that she was so vulnerable and gave us her heart and her intimacy and her questions and her struggles too, and her like the dark corners of her life even, right? Like, so I was like, wow, I can do this too. And I think that is how she influenced me. And that's how I want to answer that question about, I guess, like the political and also the personal, and just the language that these poets have offered and how that language actually empowers us.
Totally.
So I guess I'd like to ask. We've got a little bit of time here, but just maybe a question for all three of you, and something of a distillation of some of the questions that I've gotten in here, and that is how are Ruth and June in their poems and through their legacies helping you navigate this current moment? I mean, how through their work are they helping you to imagine a future worth living into? I mean, how do they give us hope? Big question. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Monica was like touching on a lot of that, but for me, looking back through Ruth's poems, I'm like, a lot of times when I'm trying to find something for a broadside for donors or something, and I'm like trying to find a poem, and it's like they're all like super dark and like sardonic and like not everyone can handle that, but at the same time I realize there's always this element of hopefulness in her poetry where she's one of these, like, I love it when people they honor the fucked upness of the world and what's going on, but there's always this element of solidarity with the goodness of humanity. And yes, all, do all things come to an end? No, they go on forever. At the same time in that poem, she's acknowledging that things come to an end, that there's suffering, that there's suffering that seems unbearable to witness. But that, when she says, no, they go on forever, that gives me a, having a poet acknowledge suffering so plainly, especially that in that June Jordan poem, I felt, you feel seen, you feel witnessed, and you feel devastated, but the poet doesn't leave you there. They show you a way out. And I think that's clearly what both of these women do. And so I need these poems right now. I need their truthfulness and their darkness, and I need their wise positivity.
I only haven't remained unmuted because our fire alarm is beeping. I don't want to distract. But I think, darkness can be hopeful too. And I think what I find hopeful about June Jordan's work, is it hopefulness? I think it inspires me to stand up. Obviously, it inspires me, it empowers me, like Monica said. In her poems, is there a resolution at the end? No. In some ways, does it feel like I'm living her poem whenever I read it, and that's devastating. And yes, the answer is yes for me. And I think what's hopeful is that she had written it, that she had a community of sisters that lifted her up, that she fought through it, that she wanted us to take part, that maybe she saw me reading it, maybe she saw you reading it, and she said the same thing to you. And I think that gives me hope too. It sort of, right now, it's really easy to feel hopeless. And I think what I love about that work is that it makes me feel like I'm a fighter and that I can stand up for myself. And so that sounds almost reductive, but I don't mean it that way. I really mean that she empowers me to really to speak my truth. And I think that's hopeful too.
That question about hope is so challenging for me. You know, I mean, I'm in California, and I woke up today. The air quality was terrible. I couldn't go outside, and you know, there are many things. I mean, I thought Rio's reading of local letter to the local police was so resonant as well. So when I think about like this moment, I mean, it's clear that, well, that poem was written, I want to say like in 1980s, right? But that it's so, it's like, what has changed, you know? What has changed? And I think that we're all kind of at home during this pandemic and just witnessing and being part of these uprisings as well. And I mean, I do find hope when I read June Jordan's poetry, because she reminds me that what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling in my own human experience is real, is real. Poem about my rights, it tells me you're not alone. And if I'm not alone, then there are others. And if there are others, I can have hope. And I think about her other poems, her love poems that exist alongside I must become a menace to my enemies. And I think about Haruko love poems, right? One of the last line of Roman poem number 13 is, your voice breaks very close to me, my love. And her poem resolution number 1003, I will love who loves me. I will hate who hates me. I will be a passionate and eager lover in response to passionate and eager love. I will be nobody's fool, is that last line. And I think those kinds of declarations and those kinds of affirmations really do offer me moments of hope in so much despair. And so it's necessary that we bring the essential June Jordan into the world. And I'm so grateful for the collected poems directed by Desire. And I'm thrilled that Copper Canyon is doing the essential collection as well. So thank you again for that question, and looking forward to another question if you have one.
So I think we should, well, you know, I want to thank, you know, all of you. You know, maybe, you know, one quick question, you know, for each of you, and maybe starting with you, Bianca. I'm wondering if you could tell our watchers, you know, how did you go about deciding which poems of Ruth's are essential? How did you distill? She's got so much work in her, you know, archives.
Yeah, it was, you know, it was hard at first because I think when I started at the beginning and working my way through, I just was choosing all the poems because I just loved all the poems so much. And I realized I was thinking about it like a collected. And I was like, okay, like go back and really think, does this stand out? I think anybody who spends a lot of time with one poet's work, which you know, funnily enough, I don't think a lot of us do. Like we'll read like one poet's like a poet like one of their books and love it, but we don't really spend a lot of time with all their work. If you're lucky enough to be able to read, be a family member of a poet, or just be in love with a poet so much that you read all of their poems, it's such a joyful practice to be like, okay, well, which poem like rises to the surface as like, and then it becomes really obvious. And for me, it was like, you know, not just poems that she recited a lot, or that I heard like family members always like reciting drunkenly at Thanksgiving or whatever, but poems that felt like, wow, this is really, this was really an important moment for her as a poet, writing this poem, and people need to read it. So yeah, I mean, I would say that like it was really one of the most joyful things I've ever had the chance to do. And at first it felt really overwhelming, but once I sort of had a rubric in my mind about, you know, this is essential. This is not everything. It got much easier, and it was really fun to do. And it makes me want to do it with other poets, you know, other dead poets who distill their work down. It's really nice.
I agree. You know, doing that sort of work with the Merwin book was such a joy.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know which one of you said it, but you know, you said that, you know, we need these poems right now, and I think we do. We need all of these poems by each of these poets, and you know, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and this is probably the perfect moment to turn to all of you out there in the audience, all of you watching, to say thank you. I feel honored to get to publish along with my colleagues, authors like June Jordan and Ruth Stone, and of course the next generation of brilliant minds and hearts like Jericho and Alison and Monica and Bianca. You know, Copper Canyon, very literally, we can't do this without you. We rely upon our community of readers, our donors, our generous board of directors, and a special shout out, happy birthday to board member Emily Raymond tonight. We also do this because of support from writers and teachers and students and our colleagues in the publishing industry, who all help keep Copper Canyon doing what it's been doing year after year, decade after decade, for nearly 50 years now, and that is publish extraordinary books of poetry. As an independent nonprofit publisher dedicated entirely to poetry, the success of Copper Canyon has always been a collective effort. And this season, the pandemic, combined with the intentional distractions of those who might rob us of our better selves, has been the biggest threat to our viability that we've faced in the last 48 years. I have to acknowledge that we are in a great era of uncertainty, and but I believe that community and fantastic poetry is what's going to sustain us. I strongly believe that poetry is a common language that helps us navigate uncertainty, and I really need your help. Copper Canyon really needs your help. To quote Ruth, I do not doubt that all things are possible, and that particularly includes poetry. Our hope tonight is that you'll join us as a donor, or if you're already a donor, I hope what you've heard tonight inspires you to take your generosity and your belief in poetry and independent publishing to the next level. Without further ado, I'm excited to invite you to join us in launching these two anthologies by making a gift to the press. In the chat window, you should see two links, one to our website, where you can choose to make a traditional donation to the press, and one to our Kickstarter project, which went live this evening. You might have to open the chat window if you have it closed. So as a backer on Kickstarter, you can choose your level and a reward, a poetry reward. And there are a couple of cool things to note. Those who give $100 or more will see their name or the name of a loved one printed in each copy of the Essential June Jordan. And those who give $125 will receive a letterpress broadside featuring these poems, which Jericho read tonight, as well as Ruth Stone's What is a Poem? And then I'm incredibly grateful to those of you who can underwrite our books at the $2,500 level and above. Your gift gives us the resources we need to stride confidently into the future. And I look forward to getting to know you as we do so. So now, please, I hope you'll take a moment to make a gift to the press, whether on Kickstarter or through our website. And again, both links are in the chat, just waiting for you to click through and follow. In a moment, we'll share a screen with instructions on how to give for anyone who needs them. So thank you so much again. And remember, we are the ones we have been waiting for. Good night.